Uh, Linking questions. How you answer these questions in the exam depends heavily on the command word that was used. So these are all the linking questions from the syllabus that are standard level. How does coordination between the nervous and muscular system result in the ability to produce various types of movement? Proprioceptors, baroreceptors, chemoreceptors allow the central nervous system to adjust force, speed, and timing, and this is coordination, which allows various types of movement efficiently, such as rowing, which requires coordination from the legs, back muscles, core, all together. How does the endocrine system interact with the energy system to maintain appropriate blood glucose levels? The endocrine system, uh, or its glucagon, increases blood glucose from glycogen, which is then used for glycolysis. How do specific qualities in long-term training influence the structure and function of the cardiovascular system? So training specific muscles will improve their capillary density for more oxygen delivery, and aerobic training will specifically improve stroke volume, while anaerobic training will specifically cause hypertrophy. Uh, to what extent do cardiorespiratory measurements such as heart rate indicate stress and arousal levels? How they do. So they do by indicating sympathetic stimulation or activation due to high epinephrine or adrenaline. How they don't. High heart rate could be due to other factors such as caffeine, cardiovascular drift, exercise itself, not the stress or arousal. How reliable is the sensation of thirst as an indicator of dehydration? It's reliable because thirst is triggered by the hypothalamus when blood osmolarity is high. High blood osmolarity means dehydration. And not reliable because rapid fluid loss may outpace the thirst response if you're sweating very fast. And you could be losing fluid via respiration and urine without feeling thirsty. And lastly, people differ in their perception of thirst. Which techniques are most suitable for generating valid and reliable data on internal conditions of the body during exercise? Calibrated apparatus, such as anything that's attached to your body, like spirometers, wrist-based or chest strap heart rate monitors. Depends on what is measured, but it's usually going to be like all the stuff that's like attached to you. Uh, Nutritional periodization. So that would be stuff like balanced micronutrients in preparation, carbohydrate loading in competition, high protein, less carbs for maintenance in transition. Depends on the sport. How can variables be controlled effectively when designing experiments on nutrition for exercise? You could use a placebo to compare the different conditions of the independent variable, blinding and double blinding to reduce bias, and especially reducing the confounding effects of physiological factors such as genetic non-responders. How does a person's level of aerobic fitness affect their mental toughness? So if they have more fitness, they have more experience with coping strategies such as self-talk. So they're more used to it mentally. And they also experience fatigue later because they're in better shape, reducing feelings of mental stress. How does a lack of ATP affect muscular contraction? What's going to weaken it or stop it? How can monitoring inform of an athlete's readiness for training? Well, elevated heart rate is going to suggest the athlete is aroused and ready, whilst low heart rate is going to indicate the opposite. However, high heart rate could also mean high anxiety that could impair performance. So it's not just about arousal. If there's anxiety, like catastrophe theory says, it could be bad. How do the training principles of rehabilitation and appropriate warm-up protocols support injury reduction? So prehabilitation reduces injury risk by strengthening weak muscles, improving joint stability, and correcting imbalances, while warm-ups increase muscle temperature and thus elasticity, increase blood flow and oxygen delivery to muscles, and the gradual increase in intensity rather than sudden application of force that could cause acute trauma. So that's the difference between prehabilitation and warm-ups. How might dietary intake impact perceived exertion and mental health? So if there's LEA or RED-S, first there's going to be less ATP, so more fatigue, and higher perceived exertion. So it feels harder to exercise in this condition. And in terms of mental health, there's going to be fatigue, mood swings, and even like depression or anxiety. How might exercise be part of a coping strategy? For a pregnant or menopausal sports person, it's going to help her maintain a sense of routine and identity as an athlete. It can help her manage weight gain and blood glucose levels, and going to maintain some cardiovascular fitness that she already had. Can understanding and applying the correct anatomical terms of movement increase the rate of learning a skill? It may be less effective for beginners who don't understand the correct technical terms, and they're going to be around the cognitive skill, cognitive phase, or associative phase even. However, it can aid in self-organizing degrees of freedom, so the different steps for a movement, it can organize them, so it's easier to understand. How does training affect the stability and movement of connective tissues? It's going to cause stronger ligaments and tendons that provide better support to joints. Tendons become more stiff or elastic, improving force transmission from muscle to bone. Flexibility training improves mobility of connective tissues, meaning more range of motion and more elasticity for efficient movement. How does malnutrition affect muscular function? So again, insufficient macronutrients, especially carbohydrates, lead to LEA, which leads to RED-S, which leads to less ATP, earlier fatigue, and weaker contractions. Insufficient protein intake reduces muscle protein synthesis and decreases strength and power, muscle atrophy. How do different types of muscle fiber affect our ability to exert forces in a sporting environment? Type 1 generate low to moderate force for long periods because they have high endurance. Type 2A produce moderate force quickly and have more endurance than Type 2X, which does produce a lot of high force and very quickly, which is ideal for explosive actions, but it's not very high in endurance. How can changing external levers, such as the pole length and the pole vault, affect skills acquisition? So it introduces variability in movement, which can be good to have an all-rounded athlete. And the external levers can get harder as the phases progress. For example, the pole can get longer as you increase in level. So cognitive phase would have a shorter pole vault, associative would have a longer, and then autonomous would have the longest. And it creates new subordinate motor patterns, new variability. Can the use of heated runners in bobsleigh or a shark skin swimsuit in a swimming pool be considered an unfair advantage? So they reduce friction or drag, allowing more speed. However, they wouldn't be an unfair advantage if everyone has access to them or they are banned. How can graphs provide evidence of systematic errors such as bias and random errors such as uncertainties? So systematic lack of accuracy, such as a consistent bias, where the points have a consistent shift from the true line. So for example, there's like this line of truth, like what's expected, and all the points are below that line or above that line. That indicates a consistent bias. The measuring apparatus is biased towards certain values. And random errors, points are scattered all around the line. It's unpredictable. There's a lot of random error and uncertainty. How can friction and drag be used to enhance training? So they can provide resistance in the form of progressive overload. So over time you can increase the friction, increase the drag, so there's more force against the athletes and they have to push through it. You can alternate between high drag, resisted, and low drag conditions to improve acceleration and speed. Like the treadmill, it goes slowly and then fast if you want to improve your acceleration. Or you can, increase it wouldn't be friction and drag, but you know what I mean. For example, the Olympic swimmers, there's a lot of drag. They can manipulate the drag from the water for progressive overload or getting faster. Can overtraining lead to altered gait, which is a deviation from normal walking or running pattern, in turn leading to injury? Well, yes, because it can cause abnormal or unexpected applications of force, acute trauma. It can also cause cumulative trauma if there's wrong movement patterns over time. How does training or participation in sport and exercise affect rates of injury? So stronger muscles, tendons, and ligaments improve joint stability. Practice refines movement patterns. It does the opposite of altered gait, so it causes better walking and running, and greater range of motion. Muscles can stretch safely. How can the constraints-led approach to skills acquisition be applied to identify and correct biomechanical maladaptation? So there's a greater ability to adapt to situations, different situations, variability in the game, and this improves motivation. Development of cognitive skills and identify mistakes by self-organizing degrees of freedom. So you can identify the different steps of the movement, so the degrees of freedom, and organize them so it's easier to look at them. To what extent may mental toughness affect recovery from injury? So high commitment will cause adhering to rehab programs consistently. Resilience will be the ability to bounce back from pain and slow progress. And perceived control, the athletes believe that they can influence and improve their recovery. So they will collaborate more with the physio. How does the type of motivational climate impact the recovery process? Mastery climate, you're going to take your time and follow the instructions calmly and collaborate. Ego climate will be high anxiety and you want to recover as quick as possible. How do personality factors affect an individual's motivation? Neuroticism is going to show very inconsistent levels of motivation due to the emotional instability, and openness to experience is going to be motivation to try new things. Agreeableness would be motivation to try out what the others are suggesting, would link as well. Agreeing with the others. What are the confounding variables when investigating the impact of personality type on performance outcomes for players of team sports? Personality may vary over time or the situation, for example, how their teammates are behaving. Personality is a question of self-reporting, which is not an objective measurement. Performance outcomes also depend on the skill of the player, performance variability, coaching style, because we're looking at performance outcomes. There's a lot of factors involved apart from personality. How can observer bias be controlled when undertaking interviews and observation? You can have multiple different observers for inter-rater reliability. You can make observers blind to the hypothesis of the study, so they just comment on what they saw without a hypothesis. It's going to be less biased. And pilot testing, you test your interview questions or observation tools before you carry out the experiment, not the experiment, the study, and you can identify leading questions or things that may lead to bias, because there's also interviews, not just observations. So pilot methodologies testing blind observers to the hypothesis and have multiple observers or interviewers. How do mentally tough individuals cope with stress? They will be more problem focused or emotion focused rather than avoidance focused. So they will focus on reducing anxiety and stress by breathing and meditation and stuff like that. And they're going to be logical and focus on the problem. They're not going to, like weak individuals, just quit, or which is avoidance, right? Quitting, or what else? Like hiding, avoiding the task. How can using single and double blinding support causal claims about how mental toughness affects coping with stress? So blinding reduces participant bias, and they will use their natural coping mechanisms. And double blinding also, apart from participant bias, reduces observer experimental bias when interpreting these behaviors or coping mechanisms. Are certain personalities more likely to adopt specific stress responses? So neurotic individuals may be more avoidance focused, and conscientious individuals may be more problem focused or emotion focused. What physiological measurements can we use to measure stress? So it's physiological, no self-reporting here. Heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductance, and galvanic skin response. Do mentally tough performers last longer on a maximal test after they reach their theoretical maximum? Reason for yes, they do. They may have higher pain tolerance, and why they wouldn't, you can never avoid true physiological failure. If there's no ATP remaining, the muscles just won't contract and you will stop performing. How can the strength of relationships between mental toughness and performance in maximal physiological tests be determined? So you can use Pearson's correlation coefficient to interpret the strength and direction, or you can go further with the coefficient of determination, R squared, to determine the percentage of variance in performance explained by mental toughness in, yeah. And you can also evaluate the suitability of the line of best fit. The closer it is to 1, the more suitable the line of best fit is. However, if you're looking for cause and effect, which is the strongest possible relationship you can have, you can divide them into groups. So you can have a mental toughness intervention group that undergo the psychological skills training, like self-talk, what else? Deep breathing, stuff like that. And the control group that undergo no intervention, or they have a placebo intervention, and you compare the two, pre and post these conditions. To what extent do training programs developed by coaches reflect stages of learning? So progressive overload from stage to stage, so cognitive to associative autonomous, and measuring baseline values, important, and progress to identify in which stage the athlete is. So you measure the baseline values, and this can tell you in which stage they can be out of the three. How can using video technology be used to monitor or influence progress in acquiring a skill? So you can identify data and performance that is not available by single and simple observation. So you can rewatch the performance instead of just looking at it once with your eyes and that's it. You can record it. And you can monitor their training, coaching improvements over time. How can mental toughness prevent attentional narrowing? Simple. When you have more confidence and perceived control, it can prevent being too aroused. And we know that arousal causes attentional narrowing, and you wouldn't focus that much on internal and external distractors. How do mentally tough individuals respond to overreaching? So they show commitment and see it as a challenge, appraisal of challenges, and they show resilience if things go wrong. How can an athlete's achievement orientation, so task or ego, be manipulated by motivational climate? Very simple. A mastery climate promotes higher self or task orientation, and an ego climate promotes higher norm or ego orientation. How is goal orientation associated with self-determination? So self or task orientation is linked to autonomous motivation, intrinsic, and norm ego orientated is related to controlled motivation. A motivation wouldn't be here. We know that it goes from a motivation, it's like a spectrum. A motivation to controlled, and the next one is extrinsic. It's like the most ideal one. Intrinsic, sorry. Autonomous is the best, a motivation is the worst, and then control is like in the middle. How can scientists use control group to claim causation between achievement orientation and motivational climate? So you can divide participants into groups. You can have the mastery climate group, an ego climate group, and then a control group, which can be neutral climate or 2 placebos, one for each. And you assess their achievement orientation with questionnaires pre and post experiencing their climate. To what extent can technology be used to enhance motivation? So it allows autonomy or self-regulation, a comparison to the ideal performance and the actual performance, for comparison between them, and an opportunity to set or achieve goals. How does an individual's perceived ability impact the risk of injury? So internal factors such as overestimating one's abilities could increase the chance of performing risky behaviors such as skipping or ignoring warm-ups, choosing aggressive uh, plays or activities in contact sports, and so on. How can motivational climate affect self-determination? A mastery climate is going to be linked to autonomous or intrinsic motivation, which is going to show more relatedness and autonomy or freedom of choice, while an ego climate is going to show more controlled motivation, extrinsic, more emphasis on competence and winning at all costs. How do psychologists decide on an appropriate sample size when investigating the relationships between reward and motivation? Depends on how strong we expect the relationship to be. The stronger we expect it to be, the less sample we're going to need. And there's also the obvious time, cost, and participant availability to take into account. Why might an ego motivational climate be anxiety inducing? Because it involves winning at all costs, and this mentality can lead to very high arousal in the form of anxiety. If you're losing, you're going to take it very seriously. And this can in turn lower performance. As we know, very high arousal with anxiety is going to cause a sudden drop in performance, catastrophe theory. And this drop in performance is going to increase anxiety further, which can form a repeated positive feedback cycle. Can the ego motivational climate lead to overtraining? Yes, because winning at all costs can cause very high commitment to the point of pushing through fatigue and ignoring signs from your body and overtraining. How can anxiety be managed through psychological skills training? So, learner-focused goals, performance, which involves performance and process goals, may lower anxiety compared to outcome-focused goals. So goal setting could be a way of managing anxiety in that way. How do internal physiological regulatory processes impact anxiety and arousal? Sympathetic stimulation by epinephrine or adrenaline increases arousal and can increase anxiety. Are certain personalities more likely to be anxious? I would say neuroticism, low agreeableness, introversion, and low openness to experience. How do effective coping strategies enable more proficient kinematic aspects of movement? So coping strategies, just self-talk and relaxation, can lower physiological arousal thanks to parasympathetic stimulation, preventing attentional narrowing to internal-external distractions that could impair the coordination needed for kinematics, for movements. How can psychological interventions be made reliable? Reduce the confounding effects of human factors on physiological performance, so the only changes are caused by psychological interventions and no physiological factors. Pilot testing, testing your interview questions or observation tools beforehand, identifying possible leading questions, and reducing bias through single double-blind inclusive effect, representative random samples, samples that are large enough, and crossover design, study design. How might individual differences mean that goal setting is less effective for some people? Conscientious individuals will be more consistent in working towards the goal that they set themselves, compared to low conscientiousness individuals. And neurotic individuals may change their minds or feel amotivated at times, and they won't stick to the goal as much. How does goal setting affect success in periodized training? A goal can be set for the whole microcycle, the whole season, and a goal can be set for each separate mesocycle and microcycle, making them more organized and, I'd say, effective. To what extent can athletes use psychological skills training to regulate their heart rate? Deep breathing can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering heart rate. Self-talk can lower arousal, reducing heart rate indirectly. However, these psychological skills trainings cannot override physiological limits because during maximal exercise, cardiovascular demand will dominate anyways. You can't lower HR that much. Explain why bobsled athletes wear spiked shoes. To increase grip friction, so they prevent sliding and falling backward, and maximizing force.